This week in London, the United Nations International Maritime Organization, many of you know it as IMO, is meeting to decide on what could be the world's first emissions fee, levy, tax, whatever you want to call it. Of course, they're going to tell you that this is not a tax, this is just a levy. But when we're talking about a $13 billion fee being applied to everything you use that is shipped across the world, everything you wear, everything you eat, it's certainly going to feel like a tax to you and I. So the IMO is a special organization within the United Nations. It's based out of London. And its primary goal is to set the rules, basically, for international shipping. Things like safety, pollution control, and now, of course, climate compliance. And what they're discussing this week is what they call the net zero framework. This net zero framework would apply to every ship over 5,000 tons, which I guess you could say covers about 85% of global shipments. Under this plan, they would levy a fee of about $100 per ton of CO2 for every ship that's not in compliance. As the plan goes on, though, that $100 fee per ton of CO2 goes up to $380. Now, the total of this is estimated to only be about $11 to $13 billion a year that would then go to the IMO, which is a UN special organization. It goes into what they would refer to as the IMO Net Zero Fund. And this fund would then reward people who are within climate compliance with the other people's money. So this fund is basically going to be rewarding low emission ships, building green fuel funds, supporting training programs on climate control, and then of course help developing countries with what they consider a just transformation. But here's the thing, it all sounds good on paper, right? But this money gives the IMO a considerable amount of financial leverage. This financial leverage to the UN, who is gaining this money off of levying, or as some would say, taxing these ships that aren't in compliance, would help determine who wins, who loses, and in general, how global trade evolves. It makes the UN no longer a regulator, and it turns the UN into a funding power. So some of you are probably thinking, well, what does this have to do with me? This has to do with shipping companies. But remember, when you're billing, when you're levying, when you're taxing shipping companies anywhere between $100 per ton of CO2 to almost $400 per tons of CO2, that cost gets placed back on you and I as the consumers. Higher shipping costs mean higher import costs, and that means that people like you and I pay more at the checkout line. In other words, they might be calling this a levy and not a tax, but for those of us who are consumers, it is a tax on carbon. Now, agriculture and farmers will be disproportionately hit by this tax. 80% of the grains grown around the world are shipped. And in fact, for many food products, shipping makes up to 10% of the cost of food. So what you're looking at are not small numbers. You could be looking at a decent increase in food at the grocery store just from this levy.